I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even slam the door on my way out. I just made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney. The second was to my financial advisor. The third was to a realtor I'd worked with for 30 years. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I had set in motion something that would change my son's life forever. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm 64 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been a widower. My wife Sarah died of pancreatic cancer when she was 58. We'd been married for 36 years. She was an artist, a painter mostly, though she worked in ceramics too. Our house in Portland was full of her work. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to pack any of it away. My son Michael was 29 when Sarah passed. He took it hard. They'd always been close. Sarah was the one who taught him to see beauty in ordinary things. She's the reason he became a landscape designer instead of following me into architecture. I remember him sitting in the hospital room the night before she died, holding her hand and crying. He said, "Mom, I don't know how to do this without you." She told him, "You'll figure it out. You've got your dad, and someday you'll have your own family. You'll teach them to see the world the way I taught you." 6 months after Sarah died, Michael started dating Natalie. She was a marketing consultant, ambitious and polished in a way that seemed almost calculated. I met her twice before they got engaged. Both times, she spent most of the dinner talking about her career trajectory and her 5-year plan. Sarah would have found her exhausting. I found her tolerable, which I suppose was enough. They got engaged after 8 months. Michael seemed happy, so I tried to be happy for him. The wedding was simple, mostly because Natalie wanted to save money for a house. She made it clear that she expected to own property before she turned 30. It wasn't a goal, it was a requirement. 3 months after the wedding, they started house hunting. The Portland market was brutal. Everything in their price range needed work, and everything move-in ready was $200,000 over budget. Michael called me one evening, frustrated. He said they'd found a house in Beaverton they loved. Craftsman style, good bones, needed updating but nothing structural. The problem was the down payment. Even with their combined savings, they were $150,000 short. I didn't hesitate. I told him I'd help. He said he couldn't accept that much money. I said it wasn't about accepting. It was about family. Sarah and I had always planned to help him buy his first house. The fact that she wasn't here to see it didn't change our intention. I ended up putting down $280,000. Not a gift. A loan, documented through my attorney. Interest-free, no payment required for 5 years. It was structured to give them time to build equity, start their life together without financial pressure. Michael cried when he signed the paperwork. He said, "Dad, I'll pay back every penny." I said, "I know you will. Your mother would be so proud of you." The house needed work. Outdated kitchen, bathrooms from the 70s, terrible landscaping. Over the next year, I helped with renovations. Not just financially, though I did fund about $60,000 in improvements. I was there physically too. I helped Michael redesign the backyard. We built raised beds for vegetables, planted a Japanese maple that would bloom pink every spring. Sarah had loved Japanese maples. In the living room, there was an alcove with built-in shelving. Natural light came through a west-facing window. Michael said, "Dad, this spot reminds me of Mom's studio." I agreed. The light had the same quality, that golden hour glow she'd always chased in her paintings. That's when I suggested it. I said, "What if we made this Sarah's corner? Just a small space to remember her. Some photos, maybe one of her paintings." Michael loved the idea. He said Natalie wouldn't mind. He said she understood how important Sarah was to us. We spent a weekend setting it up. I brought one of Sarah's smaller paintings, a landscape she'd done of Mount Hood at sunset. Michael framed some family photos. There was one of Sarah holding Michael as a baby, one of the 3 of us at his college graduation, one of Sarah in her studio covered in paint and laughing. We added a small shelf with a few of her ceramic pieces. A bowl she'd made, glazed in blues and greens that looked like the ocean. A small vase she'd thrown the year before she got sick. It wasn't a shrine. It was just a quiet acknowledgement that she'd existed, that she'd mattered, that she was still part of our family even though she was gone. Natalie didn't say anything about it at first. For 6 months, the corner just existed. Michael and I would sometimes stand there when I visited, talking about Sarah, remembering stories. It was healing, in a way. A physical space for grief that didn't consume the whole house. Then, Natalie got pregnant. She was thrilled. Michael was thrilled. I was thrilled for them, genuinely. Sarah would have been a wonderful grandmother. I tried not to think about that too much. Pregnancy changed Natalie. She became focused on nesting, on making the house perfect for the baby. She hired an interior designer, started talking about themes and color palettes and feng shui. Michael mentioned that she was getting stressed about the renovations, but I didn't think much of it. Pregnant women get particular about their space. That's natural. 4 months into her pregnancy, they invited me over for dinner. Natalie had been seeing the designer all week and wanted to show me the plans. I arrived with a bottle of sparkling cider and a children's book I'd found at Powell's, one Sarah used to read to Michael when he was little. Natalie had presentation boards set up in the dining room, color swatches, furniture mock-ups, lighting plans. She walked me through each room with the precision of someone presenting to a board of directors. New paint throughout, new furniture in the living room. The nursery would be soft gray and white, gender-neutral, Scandinavian-inspired minimalism. Then she got to the living room alcove. The board showed a reading nook, white built-ins, cream-colored cushions, modern sconces. No painting, no photos, no ceramic pieces. Just clean, empty, aspirational space. I looked at Michael. He was staring at his plate. I said, "What about Sarah's corner?" Natalie's expression didn't change. She said, "Oh, that... Yeah, we're reimagining that space." I said, "Reimagining it how?" She said, "Thomas, I know that corner means something to you and Michael, but it doesn't work with the new design. Plus, and I don't mean this harshly, but it's kind of morbid having a dead woman's stuff displayed like that. I'm about to bring a new life into this house. I need the energy to be forward-looking, not stuck in the past." The room went very quiet. Michael said very softly, "Nat, that's my mom." Natalie sighed. She said, "I know it's your mom, babe, but she's been gone for 3 years. You can't build a shrine to her in our living room forever. It's not healthy." My designer said the same thing. She said grief needs boundaries, especially when you're creating space for new beginnings. I said, "Where would the painting go?" Natalie said, "You could take it back to your house, or Michael could hang it in his office at work. Somewhere private where it's not, front and center when people come over. Same with the photos and the pottery. It's not that we're erasing Sarah, we're just making space for our own family." I looked at Michael again. He was still looking down. I said, "Michael, what do you think?" He glanced at Natalie, then at me. He said, "I think Natalie has a point. We're starting our own family. Maybe it is time to let go a little." I said, "Let go of what, exactly?" He said, "Dad, you know what I mean. Mom wouldn't want us living in a museum." That's when I knew. Not just about the corner. About everything. My son had chosen, and it wasn't the choice I'd hoped he'd make. Natalie continued presenting the rest of her design plans like nothing had happened. New sofa, new coffee table, new everything. She finished by saying they'd start renovations in 2 weeks. She hoped to have everything done before the baby arrived in 4 months. I sat through the rest of dinner. I smiled when appropriate. I asked about baby names and nursery details. I acted like everything was fine. When I left, Michael walked me to my car. He said, "Dad, you're not mad, are you?" I said, "Mad about what?" He said, "The corner thing. I know it's hard, but Natalie's right. We need to move forward." I said, "Michael, when your mother was dying, she told you that someday you'd have your own family. She didn't tell you to forget she existed in order to do that." He looked uncomfortable. He said, "That's not what we're doing." I said, "What would you call it?" He didn't answer. I got in my car and drove home. The entire drive back to Portland, I thought about Sarah. I thought about the years we'd spent building a life. I thought about how she'd poured herself into raising Michael, teaching him kindness and creativity and how to value what matters. I thought about how, in her final weeks, she'd made me promise to stay close to him, to be part of his life, to be there for his children. I'd promised her, and I'd kept that promise. I'd given Michael $280,000. I'd spent weekends renovating his house with my own hands. I'd created a space where Sarah's memory could live alongside his new family. And in return, I was being asked to pack her away, to remove her from the house I'd paid for, to make myself smaller, quieter, less present, so Natalie could have her perfect Instagram-ready interior. When I got home, I went to my office. I pulled out the loan documents from my filing cabinet. I read through them carefully. The terms were clear. I could call the loan at any time with 90 days' notice. I'd structured it that way intentionally, though I'd never imagined I'd actually use that clause. I sat there for a long time, staring at those papers. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney, Karen. We'd worked together for 25 years. She'd handled Sarah's estate. She knew the whole story. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Tom, are you sure about this?" I said, "Completely." She said, "This is going to devastate them." I said, "They devastated me first." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right, I'll draft the notice. You'll need to give them 90 days, per the contract. After that, they'll owe the full amount of the outstanding loan. If they can't pay, you can foreclose." I said, "How much do they owe me?" She said, "Let me check." I heard papers rustling. She said, $280,000 initial loan, plus $60,000 you put into renovations, minus nothing because they haven't made any payments yet, $340,000. I said, "Send the notice." She said, "Tom, you know they don't have that kind of money." I said, "Then they'll have to sell the house." She said, "The market's not great right now. They might not break even." I said, "That's not my problem anymore." The next morning, I made the second call. My financial advisor, Richard. I told him I'd be receiving approximately $340,000 in the next 4 months. I wanted to invest it in something meaningful. He asked what I had in mind. I said, "A scholarship fund for art students in Sarah's name." He said, "That's a beautiful idea, Tom." I said, "Get me the paperwork." The third call was to my realtor, Diane. I told her I wanted to sell my house in Portland. I'd been thinking about downsizing anyway. The place was too big for one person, too full of ghosts. She said she could list it immediately. I said, "Do it." I didn't call Michael. I didn't call Natalie. I just waited. The notice arrived at their house 5 days later. Certified mail, return receipt requested. I know because I got the tracking notification. Michael called me that afternoon. His voice was shaking. He said, "Dad, what the hell is this?" I said, "It's a loan recall notice. I'm exercising my right under the contract to call in the full amount of the loan. You have 90 days to pay the outstanding balance of $340,000. He said, "Are you serious right now?" I said, "Completely." He said, "Dad, we don't have that kind of money. You know we don't have that kind of money." I said, "Then you'll need to figure something out." He said, "This is about the corner, isn't it? About Mom's stuff?" I said, "This is about respect, Michael. It's about valuing the people who've invested in you. Not just financially, though let's be clear. I've invested plenty of that. But emotionally, it's about remembering where you came from." He said, "So because Natalie wants to redecorate, you're going to take our house?" I said, "Natalie didn't want to redecorate. She wanted to erase, and you let her. You stood there and let your wife tell me that your mother's memory is morbid, that it's unhealthy to remember her, that she needs to be hidden away so your designer's vision can be fully realized. And you didn't say a word." He said, "That's not fair." I said, "No, Michael, it's not fair. But it's accurate." Natalie grabbed the phone. I could hear the fury in her voice. She said, "Thomas, you can't do this. I'm pregnant. We're about to have a baby. You're really going to make us homeless because of some old painting?" I said, Natalie, that old painting was created by a woman who spent 36 years of her life loving me and 32 years loving her son. That old painting hung in our bedroom for 15 years. Sarah painted it the summer before Michael was born. It's not just a decoration. It's a piece of her soul. And you called it morbid. She said, I didn't mean it like that. I said, yes, you did. You meant exactly that. And that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But you're not entitled to my money. She said, we had a deal. You gave us that loan. You can't just take it back. I said, read the contract, Natalie. I can, and I am. Michael got back on the phone. He was crying now. He said, Dad, please, we'll keep the corner. We'll put everything back. We'll do whatever you want. I said, I don't want you to keep it because I'm forcing you to. I wanted you to keep it because it mattered to you. Because she mattered to you. But clearly, she doesn't. Not enough. He said, that's not true. Mom meant everything to me. I said, then act like it. I hung up. Over the next week, I received 17 calls from Michael, 12 from Natalie, and 1 from Natalie's mother, who I'd never even met. I didn't answer any of them. I also received a long email from Michael, explaining that he'd just been trying to keep the peace, that Natalie was hormonal from pregnancy, that they both loved and missed Sarah, that this was all a misunderstanding. I didn't respond to that either. Karen called me 2 weeks after the notice was delivered. She said Michael and Natalie had hired an attorney. They were exploring options to contest the loan recall. I said, on what grounds? She said, they're claiming it's unconscionable given Natalie's pregnancy and Michael's emotional state. Their lawyer is calling it financial elder abuse. I laughed. I actually laughed. I said, I'm 64 years old, Karen. I'm in perfect health. I have full control of my faculties. I gave them a legally structured loan, and I'm calling it in per the terms they signed. If anyone's been abused here, it's me. She said, I told their lawyer the same thing. They're not going to win, Tom, but they might delay the process. I said, let them try. A month into the 90-day notice period, Michael showed up at my house. It was a Saturday morning. I was in my garage, packing up Sarah's art supplies. I decided to donate them to the community college where she used to teach workshops. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight. His eyes were red. He said, Dad, can we talk? I said, I'm listening. He said, Natalie's been hospitalized twice for stress. Her blood pressure is dangerous. The doctor said if it doesn't come down, she might have to deliver early. I kept packing brushes into a box. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. He said, Dad, you're killing her. You're literally putting my wife and my baby at risk over a fight about decorating. I stopped. I put down the box. I looked at my son. I said, Michael, I want you to hear me very clearly. I am not putting anyone at risk. I am calling in a loan that I gave you in good faith. A loan that I was under no obligation to provide. A loan that enabled you and Natalie to buy a house you couldn't otherwise afford. The fact that you can't repay it is not my fault. It's a consequence of your own financial decisions. He said, you know we can't pay it back in 90 days. We'd have to sell the house. I said, yes. He said, in this market, we'll lose money. We'll end up with nothing. We'll have to move into an apartment with a newborn. I said, Michael, do you remember when your mother was dying? He looked startled. He said, of course I do. I said, do you remember what she asked you to promise her? He said, she asked me to live a good life, to be happy. I said, she asked you to teach your children to value what matters, to see beauty in ordinary things, to remember that love is the only thing we leave behind. His eyes filled with tears. I said, you've broken that promise, Michael, not because you wanted to redecorate a living room, but because when your wife dismissed your mother as morbid, as unhealthy, as something to be hidden away, you agreed with her. You chose Natalie's designer's vision over your mother's memory, and you did it without a second thought. He said, that's not fair. You're twisting this. I said, no, I'm seeing it clearly. Maybe for the first time. He stood there for a long moment. Then he said, so that's it? You're just done with us? I said, I'm done being treated like I don't matter, like Sarah didn't matter. Like everything we gave you was just a transaction that you can dismiss when it becomes inconvenient. He left without another word. The 90 days came and went. Michael and Natalie couldn't pay. They listed the house at the end of month 3. The market had softened. They got an offer, but it was $40,000 under what they'd paid. After paying off my loan and the remaining mortgage, they cleared about $15,000. Not enough for another down payment. Not even close. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Hillsborough. Natalie had the baby 3 weeks later. A girl. They named her Emma. I know because Michael sent me a photo. Just the photo. No message. I looked at it for a long time. She had Sarah's nose. I didn't respond. Karen finalized the loan repayment. $340,000 went into an account I'd set up specifically for the Sarah Brennan Memorial Scholarship Fund. Richard helped me structure it properly. Every year, the fund would provide a full tuition scholarship to one art student at Portland State University. Preference would be given to students studying painting or ceramics. The first scholarship would be awarded in Sarah's name on what would have been her 60th birthday. I sold my house in Portland 6 months after Emma was born. Moved to a smaller place in Hood River, right on the Columbia River. I could see Mount Hood from my deck. I hung Sarah's paintings throughout the house. Her ceramics sat on my shelves. The space felt full of her in the way it should have always felt. I started volunteering at a community art center in Hood River, teaching basic ceramics to adults. Most of my students were retirees like me, people looking for new ways to spend their time. I found I liked teaching. Sarah would have been good at this too. Michael sent me an email when Emma turned 6 months old. It was long, rambling, full of explanations and justifications. He said Natalie understood now how much she'd hurt me, that they both regretted what happened, that they'd kept a photo of Sarah in Emma's nursery, that they wanted to rebuild our relationship. He said Emma deserved to know her grandfather, that Sarah would have wanted that. I read the email 3 times. Then I deleted it. A year after Emma was born, I got a message through the Scholarship Fund website. It was from the first recipient, a young woman named Maya, who was studying ceramics. She'd written to thank me. She said the scholarship had changed her life, that she'd been about to drop out because she couldn't afford tuition. That Sarah's generosity, even in death, had given her a future. I wrote back. I told her about Sarah, about her work, about how she believed art was the truest form of communication between souls. Maya asked if she could meet me sometime, see Sarah's work. I invited her to Hood River. She came on a Saturday, spent 3 hours looking at Sarah's paintings, holding her ceramic pieces, asking questions about her process. When she left, she hugged me. She said, "Your wife must have been an amazing person." I said, "She was, and she still is, to anyone who takes the time to remember her." 2 years after I moved to Hood River, I got a letter in the mail. Return address in Hillsborough. Inside was a photo of Emma, now 2 years old, standing in front of a small easel with a paintbrush in her hand. On the back, Michael had written, "She loves to paint. Wonder where she gets that." I looked at the photo for a long time. Emma had Sarah's eyes too, I realized. That same curiosity, that same light. I didn't write back. But I didn't throw it away either. I'm 67 years old now. I spend my mornings at the art center, my afternoons hiking the trails around Hood River, my evenings reading on my deck, watching the sunset over Mount Hood. The Sarah Brennan Memorial Scholarship has now supported 5 students. 3 have graduated. 2 have had their work featured in galleries. People ask me sometimes if I have family. I tell them I have a son I used to be close to. They usually don't ask follow-up questions. I think about Sarah every day. Not in a sad way anymore, just in the way you think about someone who shaped your understanding of what matters. She taught me that love isn't just about presence. It's about honoring memory. It's about refusing to let the people who mattered disappear just because someone finds them inconvenient. Michael wanted me to move forward. Natalie wanted me to let go. They both wanted me to erase Sarah, to make room for their new life. Instead, I let go of them. And in doing so, I found a way to keep Sarah alive that actually mattered. Every student who receives her scholarship learns about her work. They see photos of her in her studio. They hear stories about her teaching philosophy. They carry her forward in their art, in their teaching, in the way they see the world. That's not morbid. That's not unhealthy. That's love. Last month, I got an invitation in the mail. Emma's third birthday party. Enclosed was a note from Michael. Dad, I know you probably won't come, but Emma asks about you sometimes. She found a photo of you and Mom at our old house. She wanted to know who the lady with the pretty smile was. I told her that was her grandma, Sarah. I told her Sarah used to paint. I told her I was wrong about a lot of things. If you ever want to meet your granddaughter, she'd like that. So would I. I've been holding that invitation for 3 weeks now. Some days I think I'll go. Other days I remember standing in their house, watching my son let his wife call Sarah's memory morbid. And I know I won't. Emma deserves to know her grandmother. But she deserves to know a grandmother who's honored, not hidden. And I'm not sure Michael and Natalie have learned that lesson yet. Maybe they will. Maybe Emma will teach them the way Sarah taught Michael all those years ago. Or maybe I'll just keep teaching ceramics classes and funding scholarships and living in this house full of light and memory and art. Either way, I'm at peace. Sarah's corner doesn't exist in that house in Beaverton anymore. But it exists everywhere that matters. In the scholarship. In my home. In the students who carry her vision forward. Natalie wanted to erase the past to make room for the future. What she didn't understand is that the future is built on the past. You can't create something beautiful by destroying what came before. I didn't destroy my relationship with my son. He did that when he decided his mother wasn't worth defending. I just stopped pretending it didn't hurt. I stopped accepting scraps of respect and calling it family. The invitation is still on my desk. I haven't thrown it away. But I haven't RSVP'd either. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt, and that's okay, because sometimes the ashes are more honest than the bridge ever was.